Welcome back to the deep dive. I want to start today by taking you to a place I think we've all been. It's 3 a.m. The house is completely quiet. You're just staring up at the ceiling. And for some reason, your brain decides that right now is the perfect time to conduct a performance review of your entire existence. You know the feeling.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the dreaded 3 a.m.
Yeah.
existential crisis. It's when the distractions of the day finally fade away and you're just left with the silence.
Exactly. And in that silence, the big questions come out to play. Not, did I remember to pay the electric bill or did I answer that email? But the heavy hitters. Why am I here? What is the point of all this struggling? Why was I born in the first place?
It is the ultimate question, the question of teleology, purpose. I mean, it's launched 1,000 ships, 1 million philosophy degrees, and probably, what, 1 billion therapy sessions?
At least 1 billion.
Right. We have this innate burning desire to know that there is a script. We want to know that we were cast in a specific role for a specific reason.
We want to be the protagonist. We want to find the user manual that says, congratulations, you were created to do X, Y, and Z. But today, we are diving into a source that takes that desire, crumples it up, and just throws it directly into the trash.
It really does. So we are exploring a text today titled The Meaning of Our Lives and Existence by Park Moon-Key. And if you are looking for a comforting pat on the back that says, you are special and the universe has a grand plan for you, this is not the deep dive for you.
Definitely not.
Because this is a text that blends evolutionary biology, secular philosophy, and a very radical, almost cold reinterpretation of Eastern thought, specifically pulling from Buddhism, Confucianism, and the I Ching.
It's interesting you say cold, because when I first started reading this, I felt a bit of a chill. I mean, it starts by basically slapping the reader in the face and saying, hey, asking why you were born is a foolish question. It doesn't just say there's no answer. It says the question itself is broken.
That's the hook right there. The author argues that asking why implies intent. It implies a designer. If I ask, why does this chair exist? There is an answer, right? Because a carpenter had an intention.
Right, to give me somewhere to sit.
Exactly. But if I ask, why does this mountain exist? Well, geology doesn't have an intention. It just happened. Pressure, time, tectonic plates. Park Moon-Key argues that we are much more like the mountain than the chair.
So we are just the products of chance, a massive biological coincidence.
Correct. We were thrown into this world without a user manual, without a mission statement, and without a pre-assigned destination. The author argues that as long as you are searching for a reason for your existence, you are going to be trapped in emptiness. You're basically looking for a label on a jar that is completely empty.
Which, to be honest, sounds terrifying. It sounds like the dictionary definition of nihilism. You're an accident, nothing matters, good luck out there.
Yeah, it's a tough pill to swallow initially.
But the mission of today's deep dive is to see if we can push through that terror. Because the author claims that if you accept this super bleak starting point, you actually end up somewhere incredibly empowering.
And that is the trajectory we're taking today. We're going to move from the why, which he says is not existent, to the how. How do we navigate a life that is, according to this source, biologically rigged to be 70% suffering?
Yeah, that number, we are going to spend a lot of time on that 70% because it is startling.
Extremely controversial. But then finally we land on the now. How does realizing that we are just biological accidents actually make the present moment, this very second right now, the most valuable thing in the universe? It's this wild journey from nothing matters to everything matters because absolutely nothing else exists.
So let's establish the context, the scale of the canvas we are painting on here, because the source starts with a timeline that is, well, it makes you feel very, very small.
To really understand the author's perspective, you have to look at the sheer scale of time. The text references a specific number repeatedly, and that's 36.7 billion years.
Okay, 36.7 billion. Now, usually physicists tell us the universe is about 13.8 billion years old. So what exactly is he getting this number?
It seems to be a figure the author uses to represent cosmic time, or perhaps a cyclical universe time frame. But honestly, whether it's 13 billion or 36 billion, the exact physics matters way less than the philosophical weight of the number itself. He asks us to look at the timeline of you.
Me.
Right? Before you were born, there was a stretch of approximately 36.7 billion years of cosmic history.
Okay, so a very long pregame show.
And in all that time, did you exist? Were you hanging out waiting in a green room somewhere?
No, I wasn't anywhere.
Exactly. Then, boom, you were born. You exist for a flash, maybe 80 years, give or take. a microscopic blip on the radar, and then after you die, there's another stretch of 36.7 billion years, and likely infinitely more, where you will not exist again.
So we are basically an 80-year flash sandwiched between two massive eternities of absolute silence.
Precisely. And here's where the Source completely reframes our concepts of heaven and hell.
Mm-hmm.
We usually think of heaven as a place we go to after we die, right? It's the reward, it's the final destination.
Right, the pearly gates, the clouds, the harps, eternal bliss, or, at least a place where my lower back doesn't hurt constantly.
The Source flips this entirely. It argues that the state of non-existence, those 36.7 billion years before you were born, that was heaven.
Wait, non-existence is heaven. That sounds like a total contradiction. How can it be heaven if I'm not even there to enjoy it?
Think about it via the metric of suffering. In those 36.7 billion years before your birth, did you feel any pain?
No.
Did you feel any sadness? Did you feel fear? Were you anxious about your career trajectory? Did you have heartbreak?
No, I didn't exist. I couldn't feel anything at all.
Exactly. It was perfect peace. It was the absolute total absence of suffering. The author argues that we have already experienced heaven. We came from it. We emerged from this vast ocean of peace into the absolute storm of life. And when we die, we aren't going to some scary unknown place. We are simply returning to that state of perfect, painless non-existence.
It's weirdly comforting. It sounds so bleak at first, like, oh, I just disappear into nothing. But when you frame it as, I'm going back to the state where I had literally zero problems, it kind of takes the edge off death. It stops being a tragedy and starts looking like a rest.
It's a very Epicurean view. The Greek philosopher Epicurus famously said something like, death is nothing to us. When we exist, death is not here. And when death is here, we do not exist. The Source really leans heavily into this. It says, we don't need to fear the afterlife because there is no subject to experience it. The mind, the soul, the I, it all just dissolves.
But that brings up the question of what the mind actually is. Because a lot of people deeply feel like they have a soul, right? A ghost in the machine that is completely separate from the physical body. And the Source has a very specific biological rebuttal to that, involving a sea creature.
Yes. The sea squirt. This is honestly one of my favorite analogies in evolutionary biology because it is so visceral.
Paint the picture for us.
So the sea squirt is a marine invertebrate. When it's young, in its larval stage, it looks a bit like a tiny tadpole. It has a spinal cord, a primitive brain, and an eye. It swims around the ocean.
So it's active. It's exploring its environment.
It has a mission. It is house hunting. It needs to find a rock or a piece of coral to attach itself to. But here's the kicker. Once it finds that perfect rock and attaches itself, it becomes stationary. It effectively becomes a plant. And the very first thing it does after settling down is digest its own brain.
It eats its own brain.
It literally reabsorbs its brain and spinal cord for energy because it no longer needs to move. The Source uses this to argue that the mind or the spirit isn't some mystical glowing entity. It is a biological tool for movement. We have brains because we need to navigate a really complex, dangerous environment to survive.
That makes a lot of sense. If you are a rock, you don't need a map. If you are a moving animal, you desperately need a GPS.
Exactly. And that internal voice in your head, that sense of I, is just the user interface for that GPS. So the argument follows naturally. If the body stops moving, meaning death, the mind has no function anymore. It's like a GPS system in a car that has been crushed into a cube at the junkyard. You don't need the GPS anymore. It doesn't float away to a magical GPS heaven. It just ceases to function entirely.
Okay, so if we accept that premise, that we came from nothing, we return to nothing, and the mind is really just a temporary survival tool, that puts a massive amount of pressure on this middle part, the 80 years.
It really does. It means this is the only show in town.
And that leads us to the author's assessment of what this show actually looks like. And this is where I really want to slow down and dig in, because the math he proposes is shocking. He calls it the 70-20-10 rule.
It is a jarring statistic the first time you read it. The Source claims that human life, by its very biological nature, is essentially 70% suffering, 20% peace, and only 10% joy or pleasure.
70% suffering, that just feels incredibly high. Like if I went to a travel agent and they said, hey, I've got a great vacation for you, but just a heads up, it's 70% misery. I'm walking out of the office. Is he just being a pessimist? Is this just an old guy grumbling that life is hard and we should get over it?
No, and this is absolutely crucial to understand. He isn't saying life is bad. He is saying the machinery of life requires suffering to function at all. He argues that you cannot have the 10% pleasure without the 70% suffering. Pain is not a bug in the biological system. It is the core prerequisite for pleasure.
Okay, let's unpack that. Because my instinct, and I think pretty much everyone's instinct, is to say, no, I want 90% pleasure. I want to be happy all the time, constantly. Why is the suffering structurally necessary?
The simplest and most powerful analogy the source uses is hunger. Hunger is a form of pain. It is a biological distress signal.
Yeah.
Your stomach cramps, your energy drops, you get hangry, you get a headache. It is, by definition, suffering. But that very pain is exactly what makes the act of eating pleasurable.
I see exactly where this is going, because the best meal I ever had in my life wasn't at some Michelin star restaurant. It was a squished, stale peanut butter sandwich after a 10-mile hike when I hadn't eaten all day. It literally tasted like heaven.
Exactly. The deficit creates the value.
Yeah.
If you are perfectly full, if you have zero hunger pain whatsoever, stuffing more food into your mouth isn't a pleasure. It's actually painful. It's nauseating. You need the pain to experience the relief. The source makes this core argument. Only through pain can you truly understand the joy of pleasure.
So pleasure isn't really a standalone thing. We tend to think of pleasure as a positive integer, like a +10 on a scoreboard. But he's saying pleasure is just the distance you travel from -10 back to 0.
In many ways, yes. Pleasure is the relief of tension. And this applies to everything, not just food. Think about the pleasure of resting. You can only truly enjoy sitting down on the couch if you've been standing until your feet ache. Think about the pleasure of success at work. It only tastes sweet if you struggled and failed and stressed over the project first.
Right. If you play a video game on the easiest setting and win every single time with your eyes closed, winning becomes incredibly boring.
And that brings us to the boredom part of the cycle. The source redefines samsara here. In traditional Buddhism, samsara is the cycle of physical birth and death. But the source reinterprets it as a psychological, biological cycle. It goes suffering, then relief, which is pleasure, then boredom, and back to suffering.
The boredom part is fascinating because it's not just pain flipping to pleasure, it's that the pleasure actively dissolves on you.
It dissolves almost instantly. This is the well-known psychological concept of the hedonic treadmill. The source describes it in very stark terms. It says, once pleasure is acquired, it ceases to function as pleasure after a short period of time.
This is the new car phenomenon, isn't it? You dream about the car, you suffer for it, you save money, you work overtime, you take the bus, that's the 70%.
Yeah.
Then you finally buy it, that first drive off the lot, that's the 10%. Pure joy. But 2 months later...
2 months later, it's just a car. It's a metal box that gets you to work. You have adapted to it. The pleasure has evaporated into the 20% peace, if you're lucky, or back into suffering if the transmission breaks down.
The source gets really, really dark here regarding human relationships, too.
It does. It points out that the most wonderful spouse or the most exciting romantic partner eventually becomes a source of boredom or even resentment. Not because they necessarily changed as a person, but because your brain adapted. The dopamine hit just stopped coming.
That is bleak. Just, honey, I don't love you anymore. It's my hedonic treadmill acting up.
It's definitely bleak, but the author frames it as a necessary reality check. The source warns that people who try to fight this natural ratio, people who demand 90% pleasure from life, are fighting their own biology. If you try to make the new car feeling last forever, or the honeymoon phase last forever, you will fail.
And if you force it, if you say, no, I demand the 10% all the time.
The source explicitly argues that the only way to artificially sustain 90% pleasure is through substance abuse, drugs. That's the only mechanism that can hack the brain to provide constant dopamine without the requisite effort or suffering. But, as the source notes, that completely destroys the machinery of life. It burns your receptors out. It ruins you.
So we have this massive setup. Life is mostly struggle. That's 70. A little bit of peace. That's 20. And a tiny, fleeting flash of joy. That's 10. If we accept this math, what is the actual strategy for living? Do we just grit our teeth and be miserable for 70 years?
No, and this is the major pivot point of the entire text. The mistake most of us make is trying to expand the 10%. We relentlessly chase the high. We buy more stuff. We swipe on dating apps. We look for the next thrill, the next vacation. The source says, stop doing that. You cannot expand the 10% without destroying yourself. The goal is to expand the 20%.
The peace zone.
The peace zone, the neutral middle ground. And the way you do that is by completely reframing how you view the 70% suffering.
How do you reframe suffering? It physically and emotionally hurts.
You reframe it as the cost of admission. Think about when you go to the gym. Lifting heavy weights hurts. It tears muscle fibers. It is biologically suffering. But you don't call it torture. You call it training. You accept the pain because you know it is part of the required process of getting strong.
Right. If I'm at the dentist getting a root canal, the pain is just terrifying pain. If I'm at the gym, the pain is progress. It's the exact same physical sensation sometimes, but the label changes how I experience it.
Exactly. The source argues that life itself is the gym. When you stop asking, why is this terrible thing happening to me, and start saying, this is simply the effort required to be alive, the suffering loses its emotional sting. It just becomes work. And weirdly, when you truly accept the suffering, it stops feeling like profound misery and starts feeling like just living.
It's the difference between drowning and swimming. Swimming is hard physical exertion. It's exhausting. But if you accept the effort and do the strokes, you don't drown, you move forward.
That is perfectly put.
Yeah.
And once you accept that level of responsibility for your own experience, the source moves into a very strong, almost aggressive stance on ethics and personal responsibility.
Yeah.
Because if there's no God to save you and no devil to blame your bad behavior on, who is in charge?
You are.
You are entirely in charge. The text quotes a really striking saying here. The beginning of all evil is someone else's fault. The beginning of all good is my own fault.
Oof. That hits hard. Especially in a culture right now where we are very, very aware of trauma and systemic issues. Hearing someone say, it's your fault, can sound a lot like victim blaming.
It definitely can sound that way. But the source is framing this as a tool for ultimate empowerment, not for guilt. If you blame an external God or fate or society or your parents for your internal state, you are declaring yourself permanently powerless. You are just a leaf blowing in the wind. But if you say, this is my fault, it implies the flip side, I have the power to fix this. It restores your agency.
It's owning the problem so you can actually own the solution.
Precisely. And this leads directly to the source's definition of sin, which is fascinatingly secular.
Yeah, it's not about offending an invisible deity in the sky or breaking a cosmic rule.
Not at all. Sin, according to the source, is incredibly concrete. Sin is exploiting others. Sin is forcing sacrifice onto someone else. Sin is actively harming the living beings right next to you. It brings morality down from the clouds and plants it firmly in the dirt of human interaction.
I found this section on forgiveness really interesting, too, in that regard. The source calls out what theologians might call cheap grace.
Yes. The text is fiercely critical of the religious model where you can say, deeply harm a human being, and then go to a temple or a church, ask God for forgiveness, and then consider the matter completely settled in your own mind. The source calls this morally harmful. It's a bypass mechanism.
It's like punching your neighbor in the face, breaking their nose, and then apologizing to your landlord.
That is a fantastic analogy, yes.
Yeah.
The landlord might say, sure, you're forgiven, it's okay. But your neighbor is still standing there bleeding on the carpet. The source insists on a very specific, grounded order of operations. If you commit a sin, meaning you harmed a fellow living being, you must go directly to that victim. You must beg their forgiveness. You must offer restitution in the way that they demand.
And if they don't forgive you?
Then you aren't forgiven. Period. There is no cosmic override button you can push. You have to sit with the weight of that. It forces you to take your relationships incredibly seriously because you can't just pray the consequences away when it's convenient.
That really naturally leads us to the golden rule. We all know the classic version, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Treat people how you want to be treated. It's preschool stuff.
And the source argues this classic version is actually fundamentally flawed.
Which is a really bold take. I mean, the golden rule is basically ethics 101 across almost every culture.
The source proposes what we could call the negative golden rule. Quote, never do to others what you would not like others to do to you.
Wait, isn't that just semantics? Do versus don't do? It sounds like the exact same concept, just flipped.
It sounds similar on the surface, but the philosophical difference is massive. The positive version, do unto others what you want, assumes that the other person wants exactly what you want. It assumes you are the gold standard for universal human desire.
Ah, I see. So if I'm a massive extrovert who loves surprise parties, the positive golden rule says I should throw you a huge surprise party.
Exactly. And if I am a deep introvert with severe social anxiety, that surprise party is my literal nightmare. By blindly following the positive golden rule, you are actually committing a form of violence against me. You are imposing your specific preference on my life, all under the guise of being nice.
Wow, that's mind-blowing. I really never thought about it that way. Do unto others kind of creates a benevolent tyrant.
Right, it justifies all sorts of overreach.
Yeah.
But the negative version, don't do what you hate, is much more universal and grounded. You don't want to be punched in the face, don't punch others. You don't want to be robbed, don't rob others. You don't want to be starved, don't starve others.
It sets a baseline of safety and respect without imposing a lifestyle on anyone.
Exactly. It creates a clean boundary. I won't hurt you is a universal agreement we can all sign. I will do what I think is secretly good for you is a recipe for endless conflict. It's the difference between forcing someone to eat pepperoni pizza because you happen to love pizza and just agreeing not to starve them.
This respect for boundaries flows right into the source's analysis of human relationships. It basically categorizes all human interactions into a matrix of 4 types.
Yes, and this is a really practical tool for auditing your own life. First, there is parasitism. That's good for me, bad for you.
The leech strategy.
Yeah.
Taking without giving anything back.
Second is sacrifice. Bad for me, good for you.
The martyr complex. Which, honestly, we often praise in our culture, but the source doesn't seem to love it at all.
No, because it's biologically unsustainable. If you constantly sacrifice yourself until you are completely empty, you cease to exist. Your line ends. Third is competition. Bad for both.
Hold on. Bad for both. Usually we think competition has a clear winner. If I run the race and I win the gold medal, it's good for me.
The outcome might be good for you, but the process of competition is stressful, dangerous, and draining for both parties. It's a struggle. Even the winners suffer significantly during the fight. And usually, in nature, the cost of the fight outweighs the prize. And finally, the fourth type is coexistence, or symbiosis. Good for both.
The classic win-win.
The source argues that nature uses all of these strategies depending on the environment. But for humans, we often get chronically stuck in competition or parasitism. And interestingly, the text makes a very strong biological argument against the concept of unity or oneness.
Which is counterintuitive again. We see slogans everywhere, right? We are one, unity is strength, come together.
The source says, and this is a quote, "Simplicity and unity are the best, but dangerous."
Why dangerous?
Because of what you could call the potato famine principle. If you have a biological monoculture, if everyone is exactly the same, thinks the same, acts the same, has the same immune system, one single virus, one bad idea, or one environmental crisis can wipe out the entire population overnight.
So diversity isn't just a nice corporate HR slogan. It's a literal biological insurance policy.
Correct. We need complex, messy, frustrating diversity to ensure that someone survives the next catastrophe. If we were truly all one, we all thought exactly alike, we would all make the exact same fatal mistake at the exact same time and go extinct.
So we should actually stop trying to make everyone think like us. We should be profoundly glad our neighbor is weird and disagrees with us on things.
Yes. His weirdness might be the exact survival trait the human species needs in 100 years.
But if we embrace diversity and we start trying to dominate or outcompete others, what happens to ambition? If we stop competing with our neighbors, do we just become lazy and stagnant?
The source offers a different target for that drive. You stop competing with others, because that creates hell. It creates jealousy, stress, anger. Instead, you compete with yourself, specifically yesterday's version of yourself.
Self-competition.
The goal is internal excellence, not external dominance. If I am slightly better, or wiser, or kinder than I was yesterday, I win. And that victory doesn't require anyone else to lose. It's an infinite game.
That connects right back to the 20% peace zone we talked about earlier. If I'm not constantly worried about looking over my shoulder to see if you're catching up to me, I can just focus on my own breathing, my own running.
Exactly. You drop the heavy baggage of comparison. And this focus on your own path, your own specific existence, brings us to the final and perhaps most profound section of the text, the now.
Because, let's reset the table for a second. We established at the very beginning, no afterlife. No 36.7 billion years of heaven awaiting for us after we die. This is it. So if this is it, and 70% of it is hard work, how do we avoid the trap of thinking it's all just completely pointless?
The answer the source gives is biological permanence.
Which sounds very scientific and cold again. Break that down for us.
The text asks us to look at the sheer staggering miracle of our physical existence. Not miracles like parting the sea or walking on water, which the author completely dismisses, but the statistical miracle that an unbroken chain of DNA have been replicating, surviving, adapting, and evolving for basically 4 billion years of biological history on this planet to result in you sitting in that chair right now.
It is wild when you really stop and think about it. If one of my ancestors a million years ago had been eaten by a saber-toothed tiger before having kids, I wouldn't be here. If my great-great-grandfather had just missed his train one rainy Tuesday and never bumped into my great-great-grandmother, I wouldn't be here. The chain is entirely unbroken.
You are the absolute tip of a biological spear that has been traveling through time for billions of years. Millions of generations survived plagues, famines, ice ages, just so you could exist today. And the source argues that our actual immortality isn't our soul floating in some cloudy dimension. It is the physical act of continuing that chain. It is passing the baton to the next runner.
So, reproduction, having children.
Yes, but the text is incredibly nuanced and careful about this. It emphasizes that this isn't about possession. It's not about ego. It's not, my child is my mini-me who will fulfill my unfulfilled dreams. It's, my child is the next temporary carrier of the life force. There was a very provocative passage where the author directly addresses the pain of infertility.
Oh, right. This was the part of the reading that really made me do a double take.
It challenges our modern sensibilities. The author suggests that if a couple deeply loves each other, but one partner absolutely cannot have children, the infertile partner should, out of profound love for the species and their partner, allow the other to have a child with someone else.
That is a heavy ask. That goes against basically every jealous, possessive bone in the human body. To modern ears, it just sounds like endorsing infidelity.
It definitely does. But it radically underscores the author's core philosophy. The survival of the species is more important than the individual ego. Biological permanence, ensuring the stream of life continues, is functionally more important than the possessive boundaries of a modern marriage contract. It's a radical, almost ruthless biological humanism. It prioritizes the stream over the individual cup holding the water.
And for those who don't have kids, or just can't, or simply choose not to, does their line just end? Are they evolutionary failures in this specific worldview?
Not at all. The source expands the concept of permanence to include cultural permanence, passing on memes in the original scientific sense of the word, ideas, art, knowledge, innovations, even just acts of kindness. Even if your specific genetic code doesn't go forward, your influence shapes the environment for the genes that do.
The dot and the line analogy.
Yes, I am a dot, a single isolated point in time. But by connecting to the past through learning and connecting to the future by teaching a student or building a sturdy house or just being a fiercely good friend, I become part of the line. The dot eventually disappears, but the line continues indefinitely.
And realizing that you are just a tiny, temporary part of this massive, ancient flow of nature, it really changes how you see morality. There was that story in the text about the snow leopard.
This is a beautiful, clarifying anecdote. A snow leopard comes down from the mountain and kills a sheep that belonged to a poor local village. A Tibetan monk happens to see this happen. Now, normally, from a human perspective, we'd expect the monk to try and save the sheep, or at least be angry at the leopard for stealing the village's livelihood. But the monk doesn't do that. He just gently pats the leopard.
Why? The leopard just destroyed someone's property. It just violently killed a gentle creature.
Because the monk deeply understands that there is no absolute good or evil in the machinery of nature. The leopard isn't murdering the sheep out of malice or sin. The leopard is simply eating. The sheep is simply dying. It is just the necessary energy exchange of the universe playing out.
We humans are the ones who frantically run around putting the evil label on everything. We say, the wolf is bad, the sheep is good.
Exactly. The source argues that human judgment invents the concept of evil. If we step back and see ourselves as part of nature, not as the lords of creation, but just as another animal in the food chain, we can let go of a massive amount of moral outrage. We can see reality as it actually is. It helps us accept that 70% suffering without taking it so personally.
It's radical acceptance.
And this leads directly to the author's ultimate prediction for the future of human consciousness. And frankly, it's a total mind bender. It challenges our ego more than anything else we've discussed today.
He traces the historical trajectory of equality, right?
Right. Look at the trajectory over time. 200 years ago, in many parts of the world, slaves were not considered fully human. They were legally property. 100 years ago, women were often not considered political equals.
Though we've been slowly, painfully expanding the circle of who matters.
The author predicts that in 50 years, we will socially evolve to see animals as true equals. We will look back on industrial factory farming the exact same way we currently look back on slavery. It will horrify us. But then he goes even further. He says 200 years from now, our consciousness will shift so radically that we will realize a human being, and a random stone on the side of the road have exact equal existential value.
A stone. Okay, I really struggle with that one. I can get on board with animals. My dog has feelings. He has a personality. But a rock, I feel like I'm objectively worth more than a rock. I can think, I can love, I can host a deep dive. The rock just sits in the dirt.
From a human utility perspective, sure, you are more complex. You can do more interesting tricks. But from the universe's grand perspective, you are made of atoms forged in a star. The stone is made of atoms forged in a star. You occupy physical space for a brief moment in time. The stone occupies space for a moment in time. Neither of you has a divine overarching purpose. You just are.
So it's the ultimate radical equality of existence. We're all just stardust hanging out for a little while before we dissolve back into the mix.
Exactly. And realizing that completely destroys human arrogance. It makes you profoundly humble. If you truly believe you are existentially equal to a stone, you can't thoughtlessly exploit the world around you. You have to respect it. As the text explicitly states, there is nothing in this world that cannot be respected.
Because everything that currently exists is a survivor. That literal stone has survived 36.7 billion years of cosmic churn, asteroids, and tectonic shifts, just as much as your specific atoms have.
Precisely. It brings us into a relationship of deep reverence with literally everything around us, the animate and the inanimate.
Man. So let's try to bring this all in for a landing. We've covered a massive amount of ground today.
We really have. From the cosmos to a pebble.
We started by asking, why are we here? And realized there is no answer. We are biological accidents.
But statistically miraculous accidents.
Right. Then we looked at the math. The hard, uncomfortable math. Life is 70% suffering. But we realized that without that baseline of suffering, we wouldn't even have the capacity to know what the 10% pleasure felt like. The hunger literally makes the meal.
And we learned that the actionable goal isn't to frantically chase the high, but to expand the 20% piece, to accept the suffering as just the standard cost of doing business in a physical body.
We talked about radical responsibility, stopping the blame game entirely, saying it's my fault actually means it's my power. And we talked about the ecosystem, how diversity is our biological insurance policy.
And finally, we realized that heaven isn't some gated community we go to after we die. The 36.7 billion years of silence before and after us, that is the permanent peace we crave. But this noise, this struggle, this 80-year flash of color, this is the only time we ever get to be conscious.
The Source puts it so beautifully. Only this place that exists is heaven. It might feel like absolute hell sometimes, but it's the only game in town.
And that's the ultimate practical takeaway here. If you are sitting around waiting for the afterlife to start living, or if you are waiting for the suffering to completely stop before you allow yourself to be happy, you are actively wasting the only existence you will ever have. The Source tells us to build heaven right here, through our relationships, through our self-improvement, through our work.
It really makes me think of being at a party.
How so?
Well, imagine the universe is just 36.7 billion years of deep, quiet sleep. Then suddenly, someone shakes you awake and shoves you into a loud, chaotic, messy party for exactly 80 minutes. The music is way too loud, someone immediately spills a drink on your shirt, and your feet hurt from standing. That's the 70% suffering.
Right. It's annoying. It's jarring.
You can stand in the corner and sulk. You can yell at the DJ. You can obsessively ask, why was I even invited to this? But the bouncer death is going to throw you out in 80 minutes no matter what you do, and you're going right back to sleep forever.
So the biological logic dictates you might as well dance.
You might as well dance, even if your feet hurt. Actually, especially if your feet hurt, because the relief when you finally sit down, the 20% peace will feel so incredibly good.
That is a perfect synthesis of the author's entire message. The suffering is just part of the playlist. The joy is the chorus, and the peace is the quiet ride home.
So, to our listeners today, if you are going through that 70% right now, if you're deep in the hunger phase, the struggle phase, remember, this is the raw material of life. Right. This is the mechanism working exactly as intended.
Don't numb it. Don't run from it. Use it to define your pleasure. And remember, you're a 36.7